Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world. With self-care strategies from Chinese medicine, functional medicine, Ayurveda, neuroscience, and beyond. I'm your host, Brody Welch, a licensed acupuncturist and transformation catalyst, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Before we get rolling today, I wanted to offer you a little free inquiry practice or a meditation. So if you're listening to this in a place where you can safely close your eyes, I'll invite you to go ahead and do that. And if not, like if you're in the car or something, just consider these questions. And if you're utterly not interested in doing any self-inquiry whatsoever, feel free to fast forward about 10 minutes and get to the Mindfulness for Sleep part of the show with Catherine Polan Orzech. We're going to start by scanning your body and just noticing, where's your breath? What's the quality of your breath? Is it deep or shallow? What's breathing and what isn't? You can just notice without any judgment. Often just bringing your awareness to your breath can be an invitation for it to deepen. And that's going to further activate your parasympathetic nervous system, taking you further into a rest and digest and repair mode. So just noticing your breath. And now check in with your physical body. In your mind's eye, let your awareness float over the muscles and bones of your face, your jaw, your eyes, your neck and shoulders. Let your awareness move down your back and into your hips, flowing down your legs and feet, arms and hands. Just noticing if there's anything that feels tight or stuck, painful, or blocked, dark, place that your awareness doesn't want to go. Checking in with your internal organs, your lungs and heart, your liver and spleen, your stomach, intestines, reproductive organs. Just invite a little light into any place that needs it. And now notice the quality of your mind. As you're listening to this, does your mind feel sluggish and cloudy, or speedy and nervous, or centered and focused? Does the idea of me asking you to pause and turn inward freak you out because you have so much to do? Or is this feeling like a good break? Or something else entirely? Now, thinking over your past week, I'd like you to consider your energy integrity. So let the following questions be directed towards someplace deeper than your mind. Let me talk directly to your body, because energy integrity is about not spending more than you have, like not borrowing from tomorrow's energy to get through today. And so often we have this top-down mind over body relationship. So I want to give your body a vote here. So asking someplace below your head, did you push yourself to get something done this week? Did you push past something emotional like sadness or anger, or something physical like pain or tiredness, to deal with it later? How often? Just listen to what comes up. Are you getting the nourishment that you need? What needs to change there? Are you taking in nourishment in a way that allows you to digest it and make good use of it? Is there stuff that you're consuming on a regular basis that is overloading you? Are you relying on caffeine and sugar to speed up, or alcohol to slow down more than you like? Are you getting enough rest? Are you getting enough movement? What kind of movement does your body want? What kind of rest does your body need? Are you making time for what brings you joy? What would that look like? What are you needing that you're not getting? Do you feel like you're stagnating, maintaining, or evolving? Is there a gap between what you know you want to do to take care of yourself and what's actually happening? And if so, what's one thing you could do to change this? So that was a little kosha check-in. The idea that we check in with these different layers of our being. We checked in with our breath, the body, the mind, and also the inner wisdom. And hopefully that was a useful exercise. If you realized something, I invite you to pause and write down whatever it is you learned by way of honoring this inner wisdom. And this is really important because when we do feel out of alignment with ourselves in any way, when we're overriding the messages the body's sending on a regular basis, when we are not living into the intentions of how we want to be living, we're out of alignment with ourselves. And the body is smart. So the longer that we let an imbalance linger, the more likely we are to end up with a health issue. Symptoms is the body's way of saying pay attention, right? It's trying to get our attention. And in our culture, we tend to think of health as binary, right? That we either have a disease or we don't. And in Chinese medicine, it's more like a continuum. So on one end of the spectrum, we could have health, and way on the other end of the spectrum, we would have a symptom or a disease. But in the middle, there's this giant zone of imbalance where maybe things are starting to go awry. There's little things that pop up here and there, maybe nothing that you would seek treatment for because it's not yet major or chronic. But in reality, this is a really ideal time to act. And I'm sharing this because our culture has it backwards. We are used to outsourcing our well-being to professionals. We're taught that the real healing comes from a practitioner, a procedure, a drug, a surgery, a supplement, and that the things that we do every day aren't really that important. But I believe differently. I think that the vast majority of the time, the way that we do things day in and day out are the most powerful levers we have over how we feel. Also, we don't actually have a healthcare system in our society. We have a disease care system. So we are used to waiting until something breaks in order to deal with it rather than listening to these more subtle clues that our bodies could be sending to us. And it's way, way easier to catch things early. I say this as a practitioner who's been working with people one-on-one in my Chinese medicine clinic for 16 years and as a body worker before that. So 20 years of treating people one-on-one. It is so much easier to treat problems before they become bigger. That stitch in time saves 9 axiom. And in Chinese medicine, we are taught to treat beforehand. There's this quote from the classics that it's the inferior physician who treats problems that have already manifested, whereas the superior physician prevents them in the first place. So I want to call upon you to be your own superior physician and to tend to what you know on some deep level or on some intuitive level or on some mental level, to tend to what needs tending before it becomes a crisis. Now, I get that you're busy. I get that it doesn't feel like a good time to take care of yourself because it never does. And I'm right there with you. It can be really, really tough to prioritize doing things differently if we don't have the excuse, how terrible is that oh no, I have a migraine or I'm in incredible pain or I have this chronic condition. It's we don't actually need to wait for that in order to claim what we need to take care of ourselves, whether that's a little extra rest or a little more time in meditation or just the space to do a little less so that we can just tend to ourselves on these levels of the basics. So you are worth taking care of, and I implore you to treat yourself the way that you would want someone you love to treat themselves. You are worth it. I'm also here to help you. I want to invite you to consider joining the next round of Level Up Your Life, which is my coaching group rooted in Chinese medicine and Ayurveda that's designed to help you in taking care of yourself in a way that provides a foundation for health and for happiness and resilience. This group gets amazing life-changing results, from better energy and boundaries to shedding extra weight and guilt and shame. You get support and strategy and an amazing curriculum to do things differently. And you get the support and love from me and from other people who are working on their own growth. We launch on January 21st, and there are deep discounts for people who register before the end of November. So now is the time to head to brodywelch.com/level-up and apply. Spaces are extremely limited, but if this is resonating and you feel like you would like some help in changing your habits, I would love to help you. And whether or not you choose to work with me, I really hope that you commit to making one small change in the direction of better, because you are so worthy of love, care, support, attention, and you deserve to thrive. Now we're going to shift gears and get into the interview portion of the show. Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, strategies and support for being well in a busy world. And this episode is for you if your busy world has made it challenging for you to fall asleep at night. This is something that I hear as one of the biggest struggles from the women that I work with, both as coaching clients and in clinic, that sometimes we get into this wired, tired state where there's so much going on and we just can't relax and fall asleep. And that can be profoundly frustrating. We've done episodes in the past, the episode with Dr. Michael Bruce, a sleep expert, about why sleep is so important and why it's so critical for our psychological and physiological functions. And it can be so frustrating to make time to sleep, to know that it's an important thing, but not be able to get there. And that's why I'm super excited to be talking to our returning guest, Catherine Polan Orzech, who is the author of a new book called Mindfulness for Insomnia. Catherine is on the faculty at OHSU's Center for Women's Health and is an expert in mindfulness-based interventions. She's been involved in mind-body healing for over 20 years, and she has a mindfulness and compassion-based approach to therapy. I know Catherine as a person. She and I know each other. We've done a show before together, and I think she is just a wonderful messenger for this topic. And I hope that you'll find this conversation super interesting. Catherine, thank you so much for coming back onto A Healthy Curiosity to talk about how we can use mindfulness to get better sleep.
Thanks, Brody. I so enjoy spending time with you. So this is a privilege.
Yay. Well, I'm curious what got you on this track. I know that a lot of your work had been, I know that you've done work on mindfulness-based stress reduction and self-compassion, and that those were real drivers in your work prior to this. So why sleep?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I was actually reached out to by the publisher to write about the work that I do. And so in bandying things about, she kept saying, well, what about insomnia? What about insomnia? And I said, well, it's not something that I would say is my specialty. Like I'm not a sleep expert. And she said, but you know about mindfulness and da-da-da. So actually I didn't think of this idea. Really, the publisher did. And they did because they saw just a gap in offerings about, sleep is such a big issue, or insomnia is such a big issue. And there's a variety of different types of insomnia. And so there was just a call from the readership to have more resources. And not a lot had actually been written about mindfulness and insomnia at the time. And I found it actually initially a little ironic because in mindfulness as a practice, a meditation practice, the emphasis is on waking up and waking up to insight in our lives, waking up to the patterns and the truth of the way things are, to speak kind of from a Buddhist perspective. So it felt a little bit initially incongruous. However, when I started to reflect on my years of teaching programs like mindfulness-based stress reduction or mindful self-compassion, or how mindfulness is woven into the therapy that I do with people, that something that was consistently reported as improving was people's sleep, even though that wasn't necessarily what we were aiming to treat.
Just one of those side effects that
Just one of
happens
those
when you're
side
working on
effects.
other things.
Yeah, so I started to really think about that, and then especially a few stories that really stood out where insomnia was expressed as another concurrent experience of the suffering that people were going through, whether it was somebody dealing with cancer or chronic anxiety or other things. They had come in for other things. However, their sleep got better, and when their sleep got better, they actually could meditate better.
Yes.
So I saw this, when I really reflected on my interaction with people, this feedback that it was going in both directions. So that, because when the mind is refreshed from sleep, then when we do engage in a meditation practice or any kind of self-reflection or therapy, we have more mental bandwidth to do that work. And so I was like, well, okay, maybe I could write this book. Maybe I do have some material that I could share here. And I actually had also the privilege of teaming up with William Moorcroft, who had reached out to the publisher at the same time and said, hey, I've been starting to use mindfulness in my sleep clinic because the regular treatments don't seem to be helping as much anymore. And so the publisher put us together, and that's how the book was born.
I'm wondering what you learned along the way in creating this book that surprised you.
Well, what changed for me, I think, is I actually started being much more conscientious or curious about people's sleep when they would come in for other things. And so just because I got really, really interested in the correlate. So that changed. It was always there, but it was now really on my radar to make sure that I asked, "How's your sleep? What does it look like?" And also with any of the things that we're using. It's tricky to talk about mindfulness as a commodity in this way. So when I say we're using mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
we do that. And mindfulness is much more than just a tool or a technique. It is an innate capacity and way of being in the world that helps to lessen the extra suffering that we've got suffering just from being human, and then we've got more suffering that we inadvertently do to ourselves. And so I want to be careful. I'm catching myself in when I use mindfulness, because it's not just like something that you apply like a stitch. However, when the mindful capacity is engaged, let's put it that way, certain things happen in the body that make us more engaged with life, less resistant, and kind of just happier.
So
And
I'm gonna pause you there because I'm curious about maybe defining mindfulness as you mean it. You're qualifying it as you're hesitant to basically just to say that it's just this tool that you're going to apply to get better sleep. So it's just for the purposes of the conversation, what do you mean by the term?
What do I mean? Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that I do find I'm answering a lot because it has become such a popular term. So the definition that I like the most comes from Jon Kabat-Zinn. It's the one that I reference the most. And Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is the creator of mindfulness-based stress reduction. And he says that mindfulness is the awareness that arises when we pay attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. And so how I unpack that is that awareness is a downloaded function that we arrive with. Like you don't have to go outside yourself to get awareness.
Right. We all have this capacity already.
We all have this capacity already. So when we do these things of pay attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally, information arises. So what I often ask people is, can you feel your butt in connection with the chair that you're sitting on? So I'll ask you, yes. Okay. So now if you were to just allow yourself to notice the sensations that are present from that contact, see what you get. Do you notice pressure? Do you feel firmness or softness, warmth, cool, scratchy, smooth? What do you get?
Are you asking me as right now?
I am asking you, yes.
All right, yeah. I get a sense of solidness. I get a sense of groundedness. I get buoyancy.
Okay. Yeah, so were you aware of the vibrancy of those sensations before I asked you?
To some degree, just because paying attention to being grounded is something that I do in conversation so that I don't lose myself. But no, clearly you focused a magnifying glass on that for me.
Right. So what you did was you paid attention on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And in the present moment is kind of a funny thing. I mean, we say, just be here now, be here now. But what I have found is that people have no idea what that means or how to get there. And the reason we're not here in the present moment is because the mind has a default mode that it goes to when it's not otherwise consumed or occupied with something very requiring a lot of attention. It's called the default mode network. And its job is to go back into the past and rehash our experiences, or go into the future and plan and rehearse. And it does that to reaffirm a sense of me. I'm continually telling the story of me. Now, that seems okay, that's fine. However, we're also programmed with what has been called a negativity bias. And so when we go into the past, sometimes we might remember great, beautiful, meaningful moments, but often we are rehashing the more distressing or indigestible ones. Or we are planning, we are worrying, we are catastrophizing about the future. We have this special way of really working ourselves up into excitement and problem with this default mode network. And so when we say be here now, that thinking dominates. So in order to allow a mindful awareness to arise, we use our senses, because the senses are always happening in the present moment.
Yes, along with the breath, right? These are ways that we can anchor ourselves back to the present moment. And which is what you were saying about our default mode, that what goes on in that default mode can determine our mood, right? Whether or not we're depressed or anxious. Because if our default mode is that kind of where we hang out when there's nothing else to pay attention to is something that we actually can influence and change.
That's right.
But it's on autopilot until we have until we take action and try to work with that and change it. Yeah, exactly.
Until we remember to pay attention on purpose in the present moment. But the thing that makes awareness, mindful awareness, isn't just this gathering of information. Mindful awareness includes the last piece of the definition, which is the hardest part, and that's that it is non-judgmental. And we don't want to judge judgment, right? Again, our species has survived because we have been able to discern good berry, bad berry. This is safe. This is not safe, right?
And that explains why the negativity bias was historically our friend, right? It's why we're here. It's because we remember, don't eat that plant or you'll die, or like, don't go over that hill because you'll fall off a cliff. And so like those things evolutionarily served us because the negative stuff would stand out in our memories and allow us to perpetuate the species. So if you do feel like your default mode tends towards the negative, you're not alone. It's kind of part of the hardwiring of human beings, and we can change it. So anyway, back to
changing it to positive, but knowing that our judgments are projections.
Yeah.
So they're not the information itself, right? So when you say, okay, grounding, like when I could, if I were really pushing you a little bit, I might say, well, what does that feel like? To really get into the nuance of the sensation. Is it pressure? Is there like a firmness against the muscle and the bone?
Yeah. So you're talking about getting into the experience itself as opposed to what it feels like. So getting
my interpretation of it.
Got it. So even more granularly that I could go into the sensation of what it's like to feel the compression of my glutes against the chair, or what it's like to feel the elongation of my lumbar spine, or like just that kind of thing. So there's what we're experiencing. That's what we're noticing. And then there is the interpretation of it, which is a separate thing.
Right. And so when we suspend the automatic co-arising of the experience and our interpretation of it, and we can kind of like start to breathe a little space into that by like being curious about like, well, what is actually happening here? How is the mind relating to it by making a judgment of it as good or bad? I like it, I don't like it. Now we are out of autopilot for one.
Mm-hmm.
But we're also, we've interrupted the continuous cycle of conditioning. Like, because the moment I pause and say, well, let me just see what's actually here. I'm no longer like just automatically laying down those tracks to experience something a certain way, which is, where I'll jump into the sleep thing for a second, which is one of the ways that we can start to internally decondition our reactivity around even something that is happening called sleeplessness.
This episode is brought to you by Level Up Your Life, my self-care support group or boot camp for creating the habits that we all need to thrive. But don't take my word for it. Here's what real-life Level Up graduates have to say.
The Level Up course truly transformed my life. I'm healthier, happier, more alive, and I love this new me.
Anyone struggling to put their needs first would benefit from working with Brody. Her coaching style is adaptive, from gentle support to calling you out when necessary.
Doing this work of habit change with a supportive coach and a network of allies allowed the foundation of my daily habits to automate. I'm now free to move through the world with greater ease and to focus my energy on what matters most.
If you're looking for a supportive group that fosters self-compassion as one of the utmost practices so that you can realize the transformations you're looking for in your body and your mind and your spirit, with a mentor and a guide who not only has a wicked amount of knowledge, but it is applied and she intimately shares from her own personal experiences of transformation, and you want to just be loved, come on in.
You can get in on this too. Head to brodywelch.com, go to the Level Up page, and apply to join our next round, which launches in January 2020. Let's get into that a little more specifically, because I've had patients and clients tell me that mindfulness is something that they like to practice in their meditation practice, but that going to sleep, mindfulness is actually counterproductive because you're paying attention to every little thing. And it's this, as you were saying before, it's this process of awareness, not relinquishing awareness and allowing sleep to take over.
Yeah. So there's a couple things I'll say about that. One, what we are emphasizing for mindfulness for insomnia is actually mindfulness during the day. So that this process of kind of deconditioning some of the habits of mind to fuse to, oh, well, this is just the way things are and it's always bad, it's a problem, right? That we do that when we do have more wakefulness.
So in the same sense that like exercise helps us with sleep, exercise doesn't help with sleep when we do it right before bed, right?
Exactly.
It tends to rev us up. But if we exercise really any other time during the day, it's going to be likely to like we go into yang during the day so that we can go into deep yin at night, and just creating that contrast. So it sounds like similarly, you're suggesting that if we practice mindfulness on a daily basis during our waking life, that sleep is one of the benefits that we can expect to attain.
Well, yes. But part of the attitude of non-judgment or just awareness itself can be modulated about how we're paying attention. So, and I'll be clear. So like if you were a violinist and you were tuning your violin and you were tightening the strings and you tighten them very tightly, how well do you think, what kind of a sound do you think you're going to make? Not nice. It's going to be tight. It's going to be, too grasping. And so sometimes when people practice mindfulness, they're striving for information. Like, I've got to get every ounce of this breath out of it. And it can become quite tight. On the opposite hand, if we tune so loosey-goosey that we don't know whatever is going on, we're not getting the benefit of awareness. So, and sometimes, depending on the conditions, we want to turn up or turn down the kind of attitudes that we're bringing to our awareness. So, if we're if we're practicing mindfulness during the day as part of like just a daily practice to afford ourselves this deconditioning possibility, this way of relating to moment experience with this suspension of reactivity, with a lot more compassion for what's arising, then we build a momentum that, yes, like you said, has a benefit of its own. Mindfulness or this type of present moment awareness can be used at night in the same way that gentle stretching might be used before bed. Like you might not go, run, a 5K right before going to sleep, but you might right before bed do some spine stretches or some tension and release exercises to optimize the body for rest. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you could walk us through that would be great, because it does sound like you're saying, yes, like hyper focusing on everything going on in our internal experience might be too tight. Similarly, if we just kind of allow for everything, then we're not really practicing. We're not really holding a space for awareness. And so there's this sweet spot, but that we want. And It sounds like this is a practice that like, not while we're like in bed trying to fall asleep, but as part of a winding down routine.
Absolutely. Okay. And I am going to say that that's what we emphasize for people to, because that's what we're talking about, like setting the internal conditions. A lot of people do use sleep meditations. And the reason that we don't, in my book, Mindfulness for Insomnia, we don't emphasize that initially is because a sleep meditation can be just another technique to get dependent on. So many people find that when they do a kind of like progressive body scan awareness, where the attention is quite gentle, that their bodies does start to soften and optimize into sleep. If we are reliant upon an external guidance all the time, then that's doing the work for us.
Yes. Yeah. I feel the same way about meditation apps that are guiding you through things as opposed to helping you build the muscle on your own. It's like, it may be a good on-ramp if someone's creating a
Yeah.
practice, but ultimately it's like if you want to get stronger, it's quotation marks, that breaking free from it and doing it on your own can be more powerful.
And at night, when people are in bed, what they have developed during the day, if they have been, engaged in a practice, is a kind of a decentering from being fused to thoughts. So that practice will transfer without necessarily like, okay, now I'm going to do this. But it's like, oh, there's the thinking mind. Okay, let me just come in. Let me just feel my body with the pillow here. Let me just feel my breath. And even if sleep is not coming, because sometimes it doesn't. This is not like, it's not a magic wand, or an immediate, like, it's not a narcoleptic pill, However, what we're really addressing is what we call the resistance to not sleeping. So that, okay, if you're not sleeping, okay, fine. You're there and you're noticing if the mind starts to say, oh my God, tomorrow is going to be so awful. I'm not going to be able to make, and you're like, okay, that's a future projection. Let me just come back to how it feels to be just here right now. And so that redirection at nighttime, super helpful. Much better to, be in your bed meditating for whatever, if you're not sleeping, than to be in your bed catastrophizing about your future, or tossing and turning and wrestling with life.
Absolutely. Well, it's like, it's another layer of suffering that we're creating on top of the not being able to go to sleep.
Exactly. Yeah. So really the thing that I find, because as I was saying before, awareness on its own is almost just too raw, like just awareness. It has to be accompanied with a kind of quality of compassionate interest. And so when we when we apply a level of friendliness to our own experience, what we're doing on a very functional level is reducing the likelihood of sending ourselves into fight or flight. Because when we are at war with ourselves, the amygdala is still going to recognize that as a threat, and it's going to activate the fight or flight response. So when we're applying this compassion to, like, okay, this is hard. It's not like making up stories like, oh, everything is wonderful, but like, oh, this is tough. Let me just be with myself as it is in this moment and suspend as much as possible the perpetuation of suffering.
So basically greeting your own thoughts with this attitude of friendliness, and kind of like friendliness in the sense of, like, if a friend were struggling with this, that you would bring compassion, you would show up for them with presence instead of just being annoyed.
Criticism, or sometimes what we, we have all had the experience of both doing to our friends and receiving from our friends instant problem solving. And most of us don't care for that initially. Like, we want to feel met. We want to feel like understood, seen, felt. And when we instantly in our own mind are like, what is wrong here? I've got to fix this. That we're waking ourselves up to. And we're stressing ourselves out. But to like have that treat, like exactly what you just said, treating ourselves in the same way that we would treat somebody else, like, this is tough. Okay. All right. we're going to be here for a minute. This is there are reminding ourselves that there are thousands of people around the world that are probably not sleeping too. You're not the only one. And that, like, okay, let's just be here as it is and see what happens moment to moment to moment.
I'm wondering if you get into, in your book, the like mindfully creating your evening to set yourself up for sleep.
Yeah, we do. I mean, so how we've structured the book is like the first part is more informational, like why mindfulness, why self-compassion, some information about sleep, because that can be really helpful to know what is normal, especially throughout the life cycle. It changes. And the second half of the book is what we call like a 4-week daily practice. So we have a little chapter for every day. And I think, I forget which week now, but we absolutely address, it's not the first thing because so many people, there's a lot of information available about like dimming lights at a certain time and right, not exercising or caffeine, like how do we set up the external environment? But what we really wanted to address is how to set up a mindfulness practice during the day, a mindfulness and self-compassion practice. Once that's gotten some traction, then yes, absolutely. What would it be like to turn off your phone or your computer at least an hour before to reduce that amount of stimuli, to even turn lights down, things like that, to do some gentle stretching to help the body release any extra tension.
Yeah. In my work, I notice how much people don't even realize what they're doing to rev themselves up at night.
Yeah.
And that really, it's like that something like even just like the dimming lights or trying to go by candlelight or trying to not have like screens after 8 or, something like that, that there is, people learn a lot about the way that their current lifestyle and their current approach to the world is actually really, regardless of what else they're consuming or how else they're living, but it really is contributing to whether they are in a yin or a yang mode. And
Right.
in the
That's
evening,
true.
it's like that, we're supposed to be getting into that quiet, still, restful, inward kind of time. And that, and in our society, there's so much pressure on us to continue the day, right? To just keep it going.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So you were mentioning self-compassion as an important piece of this in terms of being able to have the compassion for ourselves as we might be struggling with not being able to get to sleep. Are there other ways in which self-compassion is an important psychotherapeutic intervention?
Yeah, I feel like what I've noticed in my practice and working with people is that it's one of the first things that we talk about. Once I kind of get a sense of what's going on and what we want to do, it has become the bedrock and foundation because the relationship that we have with ourselves, and it is a relationship. We talk to ourselves all the time. It's that internal narrator telling the story of me. And it would be like being followed by either a critical coach or a supportive coach. Because we got it, it's there.
Right.
So
it's going to have a personality of some kind.
And I'm not talking about like, Saturday Night Live Jack Handy, like, oh, I'm okay, you're all okay. But like a genuine somebody who's interested and genuinely interested in your well-being, and yeah.
I was just going to say, I've noticed that even just, for example, the word should, how much that comes up in my life. And sometimes I think it's neutral, but it just isn't. It just isn't, considering the context and like recognizing that even like what seems like neutral inner dialogue might actually be unkind inner dialogue because I'm not looking at myself as a whole person.
And one question that is really useful is, would you ever talk to anybody that you care about this way? Would you talk to a friend like this? And most people that I've worked with would be like, no, never. Right. I would never treat somebody that way. And it's like, okay, so let's, and it's a concrete thing that we can actually do. We can really start to reorient. It's not necessarily easy for many people. It's not easy, but it's so portable. It's so permanent too, in the sense of that internal relationship. Because whether anxiety or depression or grief or fear, those things are going to happen to us. And if we have more resilience to meet them by this internal environment that is supportive and engaged and compassionate and interested, we just have a lot more going for us. So yes, it is absolutely one of the most essential pieces.
And we had a much longer conversation about self-compassion and the inner critic on episode 42 of A Healthy Curiosity. So if you haven't heard of that one, anyone out there listening, feel free to go back and find episode 42 on taming the inner critic, because we do delve deeply into self-compassion in that episode. And really for me in my life, it was absolutely game-changing to realize that just how much additional and unnecessary suffering I was contributing to my life, and just how much tension it added to have this sort of this internal voice that was tearing me down, and the impact that would have not only internally but also on my relationships. And so it's just one of those things that can have such a huge and far-reaching ripple effect, and even apparently on our sleep.
Even apparently on our sleep.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Fire plate or common connection. It's all the nervous system there.
Yes.
But yes.
Definitely. So it sounds like in your book, you map out a way that people can go from basically 0 to 60 on their mindfulness practice and be able to employ this. And so usually I ask, like, how can people get started doing this work? But do you have a tip, like if people, even before they get the book and check it out, like what you would recommend in terms of something people can do right now to have a more mindful relationship with themselves and a more self-compassionate relationship?
I would say that the first thing they could do is what we did earlier, like begin to insert those pauses in the day to just check in. Where am I actually? What is here now? Are there any saber-toothed tigers here in this exact present moment? No. Okay. So just that grounding, that present moment, physical body awareness. And then that question, would I treat a friend in whatever way my mind is talking to myself right now?
Okay, so kind of a 1-2 punch of the mindful pause followed by the is this how I would treat a friend? I love that. It's and that seems like something that we could all cue really easily with by hanging that on a habit that we're already doing, like eating or drinking water or getting up to pee or setting an alarm on our phone or whatever. There's lots of ways that we could be reminding ourselves to do that.
Absolutely.
Throughout the day. Any parting thoughts today, Catherine, before I let you go?
I just really want to appreciate, thank you for your passion and your interest in this. And so I'm just really glad to, as I said, spend this time with you and to be able to share the things that I'm playing with and learning and offering to others. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's such a pleasure. The book again is Mindfulness for Insomnia. Thanks for listening today. To check out the show notes, get on my email list, or drop me a line, head to brodywelch.com. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. I'd love to hear from you. If you learned something new or feel inspired to try something different in your life, I'd love for you to pay it forward by sharing this episode with a friend who you think could also benefit and give them a reason to listen. You'll be helping to create a world where we encourage each other to embody self-respect. Till next time, be good to yourself.